At my birthday dinner, my mom leaned over to my dad and said, "Since everyone's here, have your son change the locks on her apartment." My brother quietly left, without saying a word. An hour later, he came back pale and whispered, "Mom, someone's already living there." Hey Reddit, my name is Olivia Harper. I'm 33 years old, and on the night of my birthday, I learned something that changed the way I looked at my family forever. Not because someone yelled, not because there was a huge argument, but because my mother leaned toward my father while everyone was eating birthday cake and quietly whispered, "Since everyone's here, have Jason change the locks at Olivia's apartment tonight." She thought I couldn't hear her. She was wrong. I slowly looked up from my plate. For a moment, I wondered if I'd misunderstood. Then my father nodded without hesitation. "I'll give him the spare key." My younger brother, Jason, looked uncomfortable. Mom smiled, as if she were discussing grocery shopping. "It's for her own good." I didn't interrupt. I didn't ask why. I simply smiled and kept eating my birthday cake. An hour later, Jason came rushing back through the front door. His face was completely white. He looked at Mom before whispering, "Mom, someone's already living there." Looking back now, the truth had started years earlier. I had always been the responsible child. Good grades, a stable career, bills paid on time. No drama. Meanwhile, Jason was the opposite. He was charming, funny, the kind of person everyone loved for 5 minutes, but struggled to rely on for 5 months. He changed jobs constantly, moved between apartments, borrowed money he rarely repaid. Whenever something went wrong, Mom always had an explanation. "He's still finding himself." Dad usually agreed. "He'll figure it out." I hoped they were right. After college, I worked my way up in a marketing firm. By 30, I finally bought my own condominium. It wasn't huge, 2 bedrooms, small balcony, a quiet neighborhood, but every payment came from my own paycheck. I was proud of it. Mom wasn't. "The place is too far from us. You should have bought something closer." I smiled. I wanted my own space. She never liked that answer. Over the next 3 years, she asked for a spare key more times than I could count. What if there's an emergency? What if you lock yourself out? Eventually, I gave one to Dad, mostly because he promised, "We'll only use it if you ask." I believed him. Then Jason lost another apartment. His landlord refused to renew his lease. Dad suggested, maybe he could stay with us for a while. Mom frowned. "Our house is already crowded." She glanced at me. "What about Olivia's condo?" I almost laughed. "What about it? She has 2 bedrooms." I calmly replied, "I also have boundaries." Mom looked offended. "He's your brother." "I know, but I'm not looking for a roommate." Jason surprised me. "It's okay. I'll figure something out." For a while, I thought the conversation was over. Apparently, Mom didn't. A week before my birthday, she called, "Don't forget dinner Sunday. I'll be there. And bring your condo paperwork." I frowned. "Why?" "Oh, just something your father wanted to discuss." Something about her tone made me uneasy. So, I left every important document locked inside my home safe. Not because I distrusted them, because experience had taught me that curiosity and boundaries rarely lived in the same room. Birthday dinner started normally. Everyone laughed. Dad grilled steaks. Mom baked my favorite chocolate cake. Jason even brought flowers. For a little while, it felt like we were simply a family celebrating together. Then, after dinner, Mom leaned toward Dad. She thought she was whispering, but I heard every word. "Since everyone's here, have Jason change the locks at Olivia's apartment tonight." Dad quietly asked. "Now?" She nodded. "Before she changes her mind." My stomach tightened. Jason looked confused. "What?" Mom smiled. "We'll move your things in tomorrow." He stared at her. "You never asked Olivia." "We don't need to. Family helps family." I quietly cut another bite of cake. Mom noticed. "Olivia?" I looked up. "Yes? Is everything okay?" I smiled. "Perfect." She seemed satisfied. A few minutes later, Dad handed Jason a small key. "Our spare." Jason hesitated. "I don't know." Mom interrupted. "Just go. It'll only take an hour." He reluctantly stood. "I'll be back." I watched him leave, never saying a word. Dad looked at me. "You've been awfully quiet." "I know. Aren't you curious?" I shrugged. "About what?" Mom laughed. "You've always been impossible to read." I simply smiled. Inside, I already knew exactly what I was going to do. Earlier that morning, I'd stopped by my condo before driving to my parents' house, not because I expected this conversation, but because my close friend Megan had called in a panic. Her apartment building had suffered severe water damage from a burst pipe overnight. Several units had become temporarily uninhabitable. She had nowhere to go. I told her, "Stay at my place for as long as you need." I gave her my only active key. The building also used an electronic access system linked to my phone. For security reasons, the spare key my parents had only opened the building's outer entrance, and my old deadbolt. Months earlier, after replacing the front door, following a building-wide security upgrade, I'd installed a smart lock. The old spare key no longer unlocked the apartment itself. I had forgotten to mention it, mostly because nobody had ever needed it. An hour passed, then another. Conversation around the table slowed. Mom checked the clock. "What's taking Jason so long?" Dad shrugged, probably changing the lock. Just then, the front door burst open. Jason hurried inside. His face was ghost white. His breathing was uneven. He looked straight at Mom, then quietly whispered, "Mom, there was a woman inside." The room fell silent. Mom blinked. "What?" Jason swallowed hard. She opened the door, looked at me, and asked why I was trying to get into Olivia's home. Mom stood so quickly, her chair scraped across the floor. "What woman?" Jason shook his head. "I don't know, but she said she's staying there with Olivia's permission." Every eye in the room slowly turned toward me. I calmly took another sip of coffee. Nobody spoke. Then Mom looked at me and asked, "Olivia, what did you do?" Sometimes, people make plans for your life because they assume you'll never make plans of your own. As my family stared at me, waiting for an explanation, I realized they weren't shocked that someone was in my home. They were shocked that for the first time, they no longer had control over it. The room became completely silent. Mom looked at me. "What woman?" I calmly placed my coffee cup on the table. "My friend Megan." Dad frowned. "Your friend is staying in your condo." I nodded. "Her apartment flooded 3 days ago. I told her she could stay with me for a while." Mom's face tightened. "You never told us." I met her eyes. "You never asked?" She pointed toward Jason. "We sent him there because he was trying to help." I tilted my head slightly. "Help who? You?" "No. You were trying to move my brother into my home without my permission." Nobody answered, because nobody could honestly deny it. Jason quietly spoke. "I didn't know that's what Mom was planning." I looked at him. "I believe you." He lowered his head. "When she asked me to change the locks, she told me you'd already agreed." Mom immediately interrupted. "I thought she would eventually." Dad turned toward her. "You told him she'd said yes?" Mom folded her arms. "I knew she'd understand once it was done." I couldn't help smiling sadly. "So your plan was to make the decision first and tell me afterward?" She looked offended. "He's your brother." "I know, but it's still my home." Dad rubbed his forehead. "This has gotten out of hand." I quietly reached into my purse, then placed a folder on the dining room table. Dad looked confused. "What's this?" "The closing documents for my condo." He slowly opened the folder. Every payment, every mortgage statement, every property tax receipt, every insurance payment. My name appeared on every page. Only mine. No one else owns any part of it. Mom stared silently. I continued. "I worked overtime for years. I skipped vacations. I saved every bonus. I earned that home." She whispered. "I wasn't trying to take it." I looked at her gently. "Then why were you changing the locks?" She couldn't answer. Instead, she looked down at the table. Jason finally spoke. "Mom told me she wanted me to stay there until I got back on my feet." "For how long?" He sighed. "I honestly don't know." Dad closed the folder. "You should have asked Olivia." Mom quietly replied. "She would have said no." I nodded. "You're right. I would have." The honesty hung in the air. No yelling, no insults, just truth. About 20 minutes later, my phone rang. It was Megan. I answered on speaker. "Hey." She sounded nervous. "Everything okay?" "Yes. I just wanted to let you know." A man came to the apartment with a key. Jason immediately spoke. "That was me. I am so sorry. I thought my sister knew." Megan laughed softly. "Well, I figured something strange was happening. I called building security." Dad looked surprised. "Security?" I nodded. "The building requires residents to authorize anyone changing locks or moving in." Megan continued. "The manager came up. When Jason explained the situation, they told him no changes could be made without the owner's written approval." Dad slowly leaned back. "So even if he'd replaced the lock, it would have been reversed." "Exactly." Mom looked completely defeated. "I didn't think this through." "No, you didn't." A week passed. Dad called and asked if we could meet. Just the two of us. We met at a small diner halfway between our homes. He looked older than I remembered. "I owe you an apology." I stayed quiet. "I knew your mother wanted Jason to move into your condo, but I assumed she'd asked you. You should have asked me yourself." "I know." He nodded. "I spent too many years keeping the peace, instead of doing what's right." He reached across the table. "I'm sorry." I squeezed his hand. "Thank you." A few days later, Mom asked if she could visit my condo, not to inspect it, not to discuss Jason, just to talk. When she arrived, she looked around quietly. Family photos, bookshelves, plants on the balcony, the little reading chair beside the window. She smiled sadly. You built a beautiful life. I tried. She looked at me with tears in her eyes. I kept seeing you as my little girl. I forgot. This is your home. She took a deep breath. I'm sorry for treating it like it belonged to the family, instead of to you. For the first time, I believed she truly understood. As for Jason, he eventually found a steady job with a construction company. 6 months later, he rented his own apartment. The day he got his keys, he sent me a picture. The message underneath made me smile. Don't worry, I only have my own spare key. Epilogue. Soft piano becomes warm and hopeful, carrying the feeling of boundaries that brought a family closer, instead of pushing them apart. 2 years have passed. Megan has her own apartment again. Jason still lives on his own. Dad always calls before visiting, even if he's only dropping off homemade cookies. Mom laughs about it now. She'll stand at my front door and jokingly ask, "May I come into your house?" Every single time, I smile and answer, "Always?" Because now, it's a request, not an assumption, and that simple difference changed everything. My thoughts. Looking back, the biggest problem wasn't that my mother loved my brother. It was that she believed my sacrifices and my property were hers to manage. Love doesn't erase boundaries. Family doesn't cancel ownership. Helping someone should always be a choice. The moment kindness becomes an expectation instead of a gift, resentment quietly takes its place. Sometimes the healthiest families aren't the ones who never make mistakes. They're the ones willing to admit them, respect each other's boundaries, and rebuild trust one honest conversation at a time.